Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are cracking open one of the most infamous, relentlessly practical texts in human history. We are diving headfirst into Niccolo Machiavelli's classic, The Prince. Now, written way back in the early 16th century, you've got to understand that this isn't some nice, uplifting book about how the world should work. Nope, it's a deeply unsentimental, brutally honest manual on how the world actually works. And frankly, its lessons apply just as much to modern corporate boardrooms as they do to ancient battlefields. We're going to pull directly from the source material today to decode this totally pragmatic playbook of survival.
For this explainer, we're really zooming in on the pivot point of the book, chapters 15 through 19. And we're kicking things off with Machiavelli's massive reality check about the harsh difference between ideal behavior and actual survival. Machiavelli writes, and this is a great quote, that how one lives is so far distant from how one ought to live. Basically, he's telling leaders that if you obsess over doing what is morally perfect rather than what is practically necessary, you are just speeding toward your own destruction. It's a huge, profound departure from traditional philosophy.
Before we get too far, to truly grasp these concepts, we need to define what it actually means to be Machiavellian. Today we throw that word around as an insult, right? We use it to describe someone who's just selfishly manipulative. But looking at the source text, the true definition is really about prioritizing the survival, stability, and security of the state over traditional moral virtues. It's about taking the incredibly heavy, sometimes really dark burden of leadership seriously. And yeah, that means leaving our comfortable ideals right at the door.
Here is our playbook for today's explainer. 1. The reality of power. 2. The trap of generosity. 3. Better loved or feared. 4. The art of deception. And 5. Avoiding the people's hatred. Let's get to it. Section 1. The reality of power. Leaving ideals behind. So right out of the gate, Machiavelli completely dismantles this whole idea of the perfectly good ruler. He warns that a leader who tries to be virtuous in literally every situation will absolutely be destroyed by the masses of people who are not. Because let's face it, the world is full of people who are more than willing to play dirty. A leader who refuses to ever get their hands dirty just leaves their entire state vulnerable. Therefore, you have to learn how and when to do wrong. And you have to use that ability or intentionally not use it based entirely on strict necessity, not sentimentality. Moving on to Section 2, the trap of generosity, why being nice bankrupts you. In Chapter 16, Machiavelli flips conventional wisdom entirely on its head. I mean, most of us think a leader should be generous, right? But he explains that trying to maintain a reputation for generosity is actually a massive trap. Think about it. To keep looking generous, you constantly have to spend money. Eventually, that drains all your resources, which then forces you to heavily tax your citizens to make up the difference. And what happens when you start taking their hard-earned money? They absolutely hate you. So his point is that having a reputation for meanness or stinginess is actually a far safer bet. It defends the state's finances without putting an endless burden on everyday people.
He brings this to life with some historical examples from his own era. He notes that leaders like Pope Julius II and the King of Spain funded massive, sprawling wars and achieved incredible greatness, not by throwing money around to look cool, but through calculated stinginess. Because they were frugal, they had these massive war chests ready exactly when it mattered, without having to crush the public with extra taxes. They just accepted being labeled as mean because they knew it was the exact vice that allowed them to successfully govern and protect their realms.
All right, Section 3. Better loved or feared? The ultimate Machiavellian question.
It is literally the ultimate question. If you're in a position of authority and you had to choose just one of these traits to secure your position, because let's be real, balancing both perfectly is pretty much impossible, which is the safer bet? Love or fear? Machiavelli's answer here perfectly illustrates his deeply cynical view of human nature. He ruthlessly argues that human beings are naturally ungrateful, fickle, false, and cowardly. Because of that, love is an incredibly fragile bond. It's easily broken the second someone sees a personal advantage in betraying you. But fear? Fear is maintained by a constant, reliable dread of punishment. You cannot control whether people actually love you, but as a leader you absolutely can control whether they fear you. And a wise prince always relies on what is within his own control.
To prove this point, he points straight to military history. Look at Hannibal, arguably one of history's greatest generals. Hannibal led this enormous, extremely diverse army into foreign lands without a single mutiny. How did he pull that off? Well, Machiavelli attributes this directly to Hannibal's inhuman cruelty, which basically made him revered and absolutely terrifying to his troops. Now, contrast that with Scipio. Scipio was a man celebrated for his mercy and his clemency. But that exact leniency led directly to his own troops rebelling against him in Spain, simply because they didn't fear the consequences of breaking military discipline.
Which brings us to Section 4, the art of deception, keeping faith when it suits you. We are all taught from childhood that you should always keep your promises, but Machiavelli states that for a ruler, strictly keeping your word is a massive liability. If the circumstances that made you make a promise have changed, or if keeping that promise suddenly harms your state, you have to break it. He argues that this works perfectly because men are generally simple-minded and entirely focused on whatever they need right now in the present moment. If you're a skilled deceiver, you will continually find victims who are ready and willing to be fooled by your outward appearance of integrity.
He highlights Pope Alexander VI as essentially the ultimate historical con artist. Machiavelli literally writes that Alexander did nothing else but deceive men and never thought of doing anything else. Yet his deceits always succeeded. His entire wildly successful career was built on these brilliant, highly calculated lies because he perfectly understood this gullible side of mankind. Now, the lesson here isn't just to lie for the fun of it, but to recognize that having the appearance of honesty is vital, while strictly adhering to honesty can actually be fatal.
Let's look at Section 5, Avoiding the People's Hatred, the Ultimate Guardrails.
Now, there is a massive, massive catch to all this ruthlessness we've been talking about. And this is the crucial balancing act of Machiavelli's entire philosophy. You can be feared, you can be stingy, and you can be entirely deceitful, but you must never be hated. Hatred is the thing that causes conspiracies, it's what causes overthrows, so Machiavelli sets up these strict guardrails to ensure that fear never boils over into pure hatred. And the rules are actually surprisingly simple. You have to absolutely abstain from taking your subject's property, keep your hands off their women, and if you absolutely must execute someone, you only take a life when you have a clear, manifest justification that the public can actually understand.
He drives this guardrail home with what might honestly be the single most cynical observation in the entire book. He points out that people will forgive the execution of their own father much faster than they will forgive the confiscation of their family inheritance or their patrimony. It's dark, right? But his point is that grief fades with time, while financial ruin stings every single day. If you touch their livelihood or their property, you cross that line from a feared, respected leader into a hated tyrant. And a hated tyrant's days are always, always numbered.
So as we wrap things up, we have to look at how these ruthless ancient rules actually apply to the modern world today. Beyond just your own morality, Machiavelli notes in Chapter 22 that a leader's intelligence is first judged by the quality of the people they keep around them. Think of it as the ultimate C-suite audit. He identifies 3 distinct classes of intellect in your inner circle: those who understand things by themselves, those who can appreciate what others understand, and those who are just entirely useless. A modern CEO has to hyper-focus on hiring Category 1 and 2 talent. And if you want to keep them honest and loyal, you have to enrich and honor them so much that they feel they cannot possibly stand alone without your shared success. Here's a playful pro tip directly inspired by the text. If your VP's main skill is just nodding along in meetings, they are a Category 3. Let them go. Fire them and go find someone who understands the business well enough to actually tell you when you're wrong. Building that stable inner circle is just as crucial for a Fortune 500 CEO today as it was for a prince back then. So we're left staring at a pretty uncomfortable reality. If securing true stability requires deception, requires fear, and requires surrounding yourself with equally calculating allies, is holding on to traditional morality actually a dangerous liability for anyone trying to wield real power today? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.